So that's going to take us to some of the new laws that are passed, and there's several, all which are a little bit irritable to the colonists. And the first one was the Proclamation of 1763. And this was going to supposedly solve the problem in the western lands that we had just visited about, that issue in the western lands. So, the first of these laws that were passed, in which the colonists particularly didn't like, was the Proclamation of 1763, and it was passed as a result of Pontiac's uprising and the issues that we had in the western lands. So we have conflict between settlers and the Indians, right? So this Proclamation of 1763 is supposed to reduce the conflict right now between the colonists and the Indians that are both in the western lands. So the proclamation actually did two things. These are the two things that the Proclamation of 1763 did. Number one, it ordered all settlers to withdraw temporarily from all lands west of the Appalachian Mountains. The Proclamation of 1763, number one, ordered all settlers to withdraw temporarily from all lands west of the Appalachian Mountains. So, could there be any white settlers west of the Appalachians according to this law? Yes or no? No. Okay? Now that solves your conflict between the colonists and the Indians because there isn't any colonists over there to conflict with. So it does solve that. The second thing it did is it reserved certain lands for the Indians. It reserved certain lands for the Indians. So if you take a look at that, the Proclamation of 1763 did recognize some Indian rights to parts of their original hunting grounds. So they put them, in essence, on present day, in a way, reservations. Now the only difference is they didn't have to stay there. Okay? They just, what this proclamation did is it reserved certain lands that were absolutely their hunting grounds. And white settlers and white fur traders could not go in there, okay, at any time. Now, that's why the word temporarily was used in the first one. Now, which group is going to be directly affected negatively by the Proclamation of 1763? Which type? Fur trappers. So the fur trade was directly affected. As a result of this law, no fur trader was allowed to cross the Appalachians without the consent of the British government. So by this law, no fur trappers could cross west of the Appalachians without the government's permission. And are they going to give any permission at this time? Because they want to get this conflict settled. That's why it said temporarily, because later they may be able to give permission, right? But they're probably not going to do it right away because they're trying to settle this out. Okay, so 4 groups of people that were considered colonists were very resentful towards this law. 4 groups in essence. We've already talked about one. Who's the first group going to be upset?
Fur traders.
Fur traders. Yep, so fur traders are very upset because they could now not trap the western lands. They were not allowed to trap the western lands. So the first group of colonists that are upset are fur traders because they can't trap the lands. Who else might be upset? What type of colonists? So Garvey, you're going to totally redeem yourself, I can tell. Not so much. Still brain dead from the chemistry test. What other people are going to be upset? Oh, they're thrilled to death because nobody's coming over and bought them. Colonists. What other colonists are going to be? Merchants. Why? Merchants are going to be upset because what do they do in the fur trade? They not only outfit the fur traders, but who gets those furs, buys them, and makes money off it? Merchants. Okay? So colonial merchants are upset because first of all, they're losing money because they outfit the fur traders, give them their supplies and such as they go. And then when they trap their furs, they bring it to the merchants, and it's just like anybody else. You buy them, and then you sell them for more money. So they're losing money. Who else might be upset? What other colonists? And the Indians were worried they were going to come over there. They weren't worried about fur trappers as much as they were worried about farmers. Colonial farmers were upset because they wanted to settle the land west of the Appalachians and farm it because they were running out of land that they could deal with east of the Appalachians. So colonial farmers are upset because they can't. Who else might be upset? The fourth group of colonists that you might refer to them now as realtors, but they called them something else then. Land speculators, because people had bought land west of the Appalachians with the idea they would sell it and what? Make a big profit. So the four groups of colonists that were very upset over the Proclamation of 1763 were fur traders who could not trap the western lands, American farmers, colonial farmers who wanted to settle and farm the western lands, colonial merchants who not only outfitted the fur traders and bought their furs and such, but do you think maybe they bought some of the farmers' crops or wood and sell it for a profit? Yes. And then land speculators, those who were counting on quick profits from the land they had already bought in the western lands. So this is not a very popular law passed by George Grenville in Parliament. Okay? But it did settle for a moment the problem in the western lands. The next act that came about that was an incredibly stinging blow to the colonists was the Sugar Act of 1764. The Sugar Act of 1764. Now, Parliament hoped to accomplish two goals by passing the Sugar Act of 1764. Okay? Parliament hoped to accomplish two goals when they passed the Sugar Act of 1764. One of them we've talked about. What? Let's think. Why are they raising money? Pay the expenses of protecting what? The British Empire, including the American colonies. And did they not think that the American colonies should share in that because they were royal citizens? So the first goal that Parliament hoped to accomplish by passing the Sugar Act was to raise money to help pay expenses of protecting the American colonies and their empire from attack from their enemies. So raising money for defense, raising money to help pay expenses protecting the empire, including the American colonies. The second one is the one I don't think they cared near much for, and that was, the second goal was to reduce taxes for citizens where? Back in Britain. To reduce taxes for citizens back in Britain. So the Sugar Act, the goal of the Sugar Act on the part of Parliament was, number one, to raise money to help pay expenses of defending their empire, including the American colonies, and the second reason was try to reduce taxes for citizens back in Great Britain. So what the Sugar Act did is it placed a duty, which is another fancy name for a tax, on the following three products. The Sugar Act placed a duty, which is on your ID sheet, another name for that is a tax, placed a duty on the following three things. Obviously one of them would be sugar. And what might be another one that's kind of sweet in taste?
Molasses.
Molasses. That way you redeemed yourself. Wait for McGarvin. She's going to get this one. No, you're not. Okay. Molasses and sugar. The third one encompassed a lot of things. I mean, molasses and sugar are pretty cut and dried, right? The third thing the Sugar Act placed a duty on was any products imported into the American colonies from outside the British Empire. So it put a tax on all products imported into the American colonies from outside the British Empire, which means they would be placing a duty or tax on things imported from like where? Spain, France, other people outside their empire. Were they going to pay a tax on things imported from Great Britain? No. But anything came from France, Spain, anywhere outside their vast empire would be taxed. Now, if you were the British government and you just threw this tax on, that you're going to tax sugar and molasses, and especially you're going to tax things that are imported in from countries outside the English Empire, what might you worry about?
Smugglers.
Smuggling, very good. Smuggling is simply importing or exporting goods secretly or illegally. So they were worried about smuggling. The English government was worried about smuggling. In other words, that the American colonists would import or export goods secretly or illegally. Another thing they were concerned about is they have to, we call it the IRS. If you don't pay your taxes as required by the government, they come after you and throw you in jail eventually if you refuse to pay your taxes. So not only do they have to worry about smuggling, they also have to worry about the enforcement of the new act. They have to make sure they enforce it. But we'll talk about smuggling first. So they had an enforcement problem and then they had a smuggling problem. So as a result of their concern over smuggling, here are 4 things the British government did to try to make sure that smuggling did not occur. Okay? Here are 4 things the British government did to try to make sure that the smuggling did not occur. What might be your easiest thought? What might be the thing they do? What would you do? Okay, you want to make sure there's no smuggling, so what are you going to do? No, you're talking about consequences. I'm talking about how you're going to keep it from happening. Well, yeah, but that's not, you're ahead of the game. You got the right idea, but how are we going to maybe catch them? That might be a better way to put it. Totally redeem yourself, Bailey. How are we going to make sure they don't smuggle? What?
Check things coming in and out.
Pretty close. British naval patrols inspected all ships entering colonial harbors looking for smuggled goods. So they had British naval patrols. As a ship would enter a colonial harbor anywhere, they would inspect and make sure they didn't have any smuggled goods. So that's right. British naval patrols inspected all ships entering colonial harbors. Now, think about this, McGarvin, because I'm going to let you redeem yourself even to an outstanding effort here. If, say, the British naval patrols missed a ship that was containing some smuggled goods, where might they look next? Where are these goods going to probably go to? And the merchants, what? Very good, warehouse. There you go. British inspectors searched warehouses looking for smuggled goods already. So if they didn't catch it on the ship, they didn't have any problem going into the merchant's warehouse, very good, my dear, and looking in there, searching the warehouses. Now let's say that they didn't find them in the ships and they didn't quite get to the warehouse. Where would be the next place that British inspectors might search to find smuggled goods? Very good. Colonial personal homes. Yes?
How do they tell if it's smuggled?
How do they tell if it's smuggled? Because I bet you anything, they knew if it came from France or it came from, they knew it wasn't one of their items. So if they found something in a home that wasn't British goods, they would see if they paid the tax on it. And if they didn't,
How would they know they paid the tax on it?
well, I'm sure there has to be paperwork. I mean, just like the government knows I pay my taxes, I have to file.
Like,
Okay.
what's an example of like something that would?
What be smuggled?
Yeah.
Fine French furniture.
Oh, okay.
Maybe a wealthy plantation owner decided he wanted some new French furniture, and then you'd have to pay quite a duty to get that from France and didn't want to pay it. Now, so I told you 3 things. Now, if 1, 2, and 3 didn't work, they even tried to pay colonists reward money to turn in other colonists that they knew were smuggling goods. So the 4th option was revenue collectors tried to enlist the help of colonists by offering rewards to citizens who reported smuggling among their friends or neighbors. Rat them out, get a reward. And tell you what, went to Barr's plantation the other day, saw this unbelievable French satay. And I know they didn't pay any tax on that, so you might check that out. Then what would they do? They'd go into the Barr residence, find that, found there was no tax paid, and they would, as Blaine said, they didn't go to the death penalty, but they would fine them or make their life miserable, and then they would pay whoever told on the bars. Now, again, the Sugar Act would interfere severely with the businesses in the colonies. Colonial merchants felt the sting of this. Who else beside the merchants might feel the sting? Ship owners. Okay, colonial ship owners, because they, you know what I'm saying? They're going to have to pay a tax on all this stuff. It just runs downward. And rum was quite popular in the colonies, so all the colonial rum distillers also felt the bite of this Sugar Act. Most of this didn't come from so much taxing sugar and molasses as it came from the imports tax, the things that came to America outside the British Empire. Now you think about this. If the ship owner's going to be charged a duty or tax to put those goods from France on his ship, who's he going to pass that cost on to, or at least part of it? The merchant. And who's the merchant going to pass that on to? The buyer. So it just runs downhill. And so this really affected everyone because we were used to either earning or buying products duty or tax-free. So it's just like when I moved here, the biggest mistake I ever made, because I'm an idiot, is I moved from Montana where there's no sales tax. And I'm thinking, you know, I really believe strongly that if I work in this community and I make good money from this community, if at all possible, I should try to buy in this community rather than run to Billings or run to Casper. So I have a buddy of mine that's a Ford dealer in Montana. And he's a good friend of mine. He gives me the deal of the century. So I go to buy a different pickup when I first moved here. I hadn't been here 2 months. I said, I'm going to get a different pickup. Even though my buddy is a good friend of mine, I really feel like I should buy in Worland. So I go down to one of the dealers here, and I wheel and deal and really think I got a hell of a bargain till I went to the courthouse and licensed my vehicle and paid the tax on it. I went, oh, I forgot about that. If I'd have thought about that, I'd have tried to get the price down on this end farther. You see what I'm saying? I'm not kidding you. It was like I got surprised. I was used to in Montana going and buying a $10,000 pickup and paying $10,000, not $10,000 plus 6% tax. And so that's what the colonists felt like, is my God, I've been used to buying these supplies, now I'm going to have to pay extra tax. Nobody would like that, especially when you don't have any representation to that tax. I couldn't cry too bad because A, I chose to move to Wyoming, and B, I have a say in that because I elect officials that make those decisions. I even got a vote on if the tax goes up 1% or not. You get a vote, right? So you have representation. You might not win your vote, but you at least have the right to. Same thing here. So as a result of all this, colonial businessmen and colonial ship owners and colonial merchants and even colonists began to organize committees to discuss means of resistance against this act. Okay, they were going to complain about it. So these people that were mad about this Sugar Act decided they'd meet in committees and find out ways they could resist this tax because they didn't think it was very fair. Because they were not being represented in the laws. Okay, that'll take us to a short subtopic, which is 2 more unpopular laws by Parliament. So in essence, after the first act we talked about, which was what? Proclamation. Okay, and now the Sugar Act. We're going to pass 2 more unpopular laws, bang, 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 before we even have a chance to get settled in. The first one was the Currency Act of 1764. The Currency Act of 1764. Now this law forbid the colonies to issue paper money. Forbid the colonies to issue paper money. So how did colonists have to pay their taxes if they couldn't pay them in gold or, in paper money? They had to use gold or silver, right? Gold or silver. Now this really antagonized many colonists, especially what group got antagonized, who liked to keep their gold and silver? Merchants. Okay? It's just like if I went to the grocery store, and this is a bad example, but it kind of gets the point across. I go to the grocery store, I'm used to paying with my debit card. Real easy, just whip it out. Now all of a sudden I got to pay in silver dollars. Well, those silver dollars, I don't want to give up my silver dollars. They might be worth something someday. Or a little bit inconvenient if I got to go down and get a bunch of the new presidential dollars to pay $47 worth of grocery bill. They won't take my debit card. They won't let me write a check because that's paper money. They want me to pay. No, I can't even take out a 20 and pay, or 2 20s or whatever. I gotta go get coins. And I wanna keep those coins, and they're worth more to me. So it really antagonized colonists. Would that antagonize you if you went into the store and had to, bought a new pair of jeans for $30 and you didn't have any dollars on you, presidential dollars, and so you said, oh, that's only all we're taking is those presidential dollars. You'd have to go to the bank, you'd have to hope they had the presidential dollars, and then you'd have to pay with a bag as you walked in the mall. You wouldn't like that, okay? The second act that was very unpopular that was passed was called the Quartering Act of 1765. The Quartering Act. What's another definition of quartering that doesn't have anything to do with money?
Housing.
Housing, right? And what it stated is that the colonists had to provide barracks and supplies for any British troops stationed in America. So they forced the colonists to pay for and provide barracks and supplies, including food, for any British troops stationed in America. They had to pay for it, not the British government. Okay? That would be, I don't know how to try to give another example. That would be like I go camping at Boulder Park and it costs me $15 a night to park my trailer, and now they pass a law that every time one of you kids comes up to camp at Boulder Park, I've got to pay for your campsite and feed you the whole time you're there. I mean, I like you, so I might want to do that. But they didn't like the British soldiers, so that was not something they wanted to do. So they threw that on top of the colonists as well. But the one that really got them wound up was the